Dr. Elijah Brooks glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight, and the hospital halls were eerily quiet, save for the occasional beep of machinery. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted but determined to finish his shift. Just as he was about to leave, his pager buzzed. Emergency in the ER. Unconscious child, 9 years old. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. Children were always the hardest cases. He rushed down the hallway, his mind racing. As a renowned surgeon, he had seen it all, but something about the urgency of the call unsettled him. The doors to the ER swung open, and there she was, Sarah, pale and still, hooked up to machines that blinked ominously. Her parents stood nearby, their faces pale with terror. Elijah approached them, offering a brief but reassuring nod before turning to examine the child. "She collapsed at school," her mother whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "She was fine this morning, and then she just fell." Elijah frowned, studying Sarah's vitals. Her heartbeat was weak, and her breathing irregular. It didn't make sense. She was too young, too healthy. Then, as he leaned in closer, he saw it. A small bruise on her neck, almost invisible. His gut twisted. This was no ordinary collapse. "Elijah," a nurse whispered, pulling him aside, "this just came for you." She handed him a note, folded neatly. He unfolded it slowly. Scrawled in bold, hurried handwriting were the words, "Don't save her." Elijah's pulse quickened. What was going on? He glanced at Sarah, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. He knew he couldn't ignore the warning, but he also couldn't let this child die. He crumpled the note in his hand, making a silent vow. Whoever sent that message had no idea who they were dealing with. "Prep the OR," he ordered, his voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty brewing inside him. "We're saving her." As he turned back to the unconscious girl, he felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a much darker mystery, one that would shake the entire hospital to its core. The operating room was abuzz with activity, the soft hum of machines blending with the quiet focus of the surgical team. Dr. Elijah Brooks, now suited up and standing over Sarah, was the calm at the center of the storm. But inside, his mind was racing. The note, "Don't save her," flashed in his thoughts, unsettling him more than he let on. Who would send such a message? And why? It felt personal, but he couldn't afford to let the fear of the unknown affect his focus. He had a job to do. "Vitals?" Elijah asked, his voice firm and controlled. "Steady, but weak," replied the anesthesiologist. "Heart rate is fluctuating." "Let's proceed." Elijah nodded toward his team. His hands, steady as always, began the delicate task of assessing Sarah's internal state. From the initial scans, there was no obvious cause for her collapse. No head trauma, no signs of internal bleeding, just that faint bruise on her neck. It was a mystery. Hours passed, and the procedure seemed to go smoothly. Sarah's vitals were stabilizing, and the tension in the room began to ease. Elijah let out a quiet breath of relief. For a moment, he believed that whatever shadow was hanging over this child would pass. Then, without warning, Sarah's heart monitor began to beep erratically. The sharp, staccato sound cut through the calm like a knife. "Heart rate dropping," one of the nurses called out, panic creeping into her voice. "We're losing her." Elijah's heart raced as adrenaline surged through him. "Increase oxygen flow! Get me the defibrillator now!" The room erupted into organized chaos. His team moved with precision, but fear was beginning to settle in the corners of their eyes. Sarah's heart rate continued to plummet, and within seconds the once steady blip of the monitor became a flat, lifeless line. "She's in cardiac arrest," Elijah shouted, grabbing the paddles from the nurse beside him. He placed them against Sarah's chest. "Clear!" The jolt of electricity ran through her body, causing a sharp but momentary movement. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the line to spike again, waiting for any sign of life. Nothing. "Again!" Elijah's voice was hoarse, his mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was stabilizing. What went wrong? "Clear!" he repeated, sending another shock through her fragile frame. Still nothing. The team exchanged anxious glances. The clock was ticking, each passing second chipping away at Sarah's chances of survival. Elijah wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Again. One more time. The nurse hesitated, her eyes pleading with Elijah to stop. "Dr. Brooks, she's—" "Now!" Elijah barked, his voice slicing through the tension like a whip. He pressed the paddles once more to Sarah's chest, sending the final jolt of electricity into her small body. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The room fell into a thick, suffocating silence. And then, suddenly, the monitor beeped. Just once, faintly. The tiny sound echoed like a beacon of hope, and then another beep followed, and another. Slowly, steadily, Sarah's heart began to beat again. "She's stabilizing," the anesthesiologist confirmed, his voice trembling with relief. Elijah let out a shaky breath, stepping back from the operating table. His heart was still pounding in his chest, but Sarah's was too, and that was all that mattered. "We're not out of the woods yet," Elijah murmured. "Let's get her to the recovery room." As the surgical team wheeled Sarah out of the OR, Elijah pulled off his gloves, his mind still racing. The momentary relief of saving her life was overshadowed by the nagging suspicion that this wasn't over. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this child's condition, something that went beyond the operating room. Just as he began to leave the OR, a nurse ran up to him, her face pale. "Dr. Brooks, there's someone here to see you." Elijah frowned. "Who?" "A man from the administration," she whispered. "He says it's urgent." Without a word, Elijah followed her down the hallway, his gut twisting with anxiety. As he approached the small conference room where the man was waiting, he braced himself for whatever news was about to come. He opened the door to find a stern-looking man in a crisp suit standing by the window, his back turned. The man turned slowly, his face unreadable. "Dr. Brooks," the man began, his voice cold and formal. "I'm Richard Palmer, head of the hospital's legal department. I'm here to discuss the girl you just saved, Sarah." Elijah's chest tightened. "Is she okay?" "She's stable for now," Palmer replied, his gaze narrowing. "But that's not why I'm here. Sarah isn't just any patient. Her family is connected. Her father is a senator, and her mother sits on the board of directors for a prominent pharmaceutical company." Elijah's heart sank. Politics, of course. "Dr. Brooks, I'm going to ask you a very important question, and I need you to think carefully before answering." Palmer's voice was low and ominous. "Did you receive any unusual messages before or during the surgery?" The cryptic note flashed in Elijah's mind, but he hesitated. Was it safe to reveal? Could this man be trusted? "I don't know what you're talking about," Elijah lied, keeping his expression neutral. Palmer studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Good. Keep it that way." Without another word, Palmer turned on his heel and left the room, leaving Elijah standing there, frozen in place. Elijah's hands balled into fists. Something was very wrong here, and he was caught in the middle of it. But whatever it was, he wasn't going to let it go. Elijah spent the next few days consumed by Sarah's case. He replayed every detail of the surgery in his mind, searching for answers. The note, the sudden cardiac arrest, the political ties, it all gnawed at him like a relentless itch. He couldn't let it go. One evening, after a long shift, Elijah sat in his office, staring at Sarah's medical file. There was something there, something he was missing. As he flipped through the pages for what felt like the 100th time, a single detail caught his eye. A routine blood test result had been flagged. It was a small anomaly, easily overlooked by most doctors, but Elijah had seen something like it before. He quickly logged into the hospital's database, cross-referencing similar cases from the past year. To his shock, he found a pattern. Several children, all from prominent families, had been admitted to the hospital with similar symptoms, unexplained collapses, cardiac issues, and all with the same unusual blood markers. Elijah's heart pounded in his chest. These weren't isolated incidents. This was something bigger. As he leaned back in his chair, trying to process the magnitude of what he had just uncovered, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Naomi, his colleague and confidant. "We need to talk. Urgent." Elijah's pulse quickened. He grabbed his coat and headed out the door, knowing that whatever Naomi had to say would only deepen the mystery. Elijah rushed through the dimly lit corridors of the hospital, his thoughts racing. Naomi was one of the few people he could trust in this twisted situation. She had always been a brilliant physician, but more than that, she was relentless when it came to digging for the truth. If Naomi said it was urgent, Elijah knew it would be important. He reached the cafe where Naomi had asked to meet. The late hour meant the place was nearly empty, the quiet hum of the coffee machine the only sound breaking the stillness. Naomi sat at a corner table, her face pale, eyes shadowed with worry. She didn't look up until Elijah sat across from her. "You found something, didn't you?" Elijah asked, breaking the silence. Naomi nodded slowly, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her coffee cup. "I did. And you're not going to like it. Tell me." Naomi hesitated, then slid a folder across the table toward him. Elijah opened it, scanning the documents inside. At first glance, they seemed like routine medical reports until he saw the name of the drug. Cortexolin. Elijah's brow furrowed. "What's this?" "It's an experimental drug," Naomi said, her voice low. "I've been looking into Sarah's blood markers, and they match those of several other patients who were part of a secret drug trial. Cortexolin is supposed to enhance cognitive functions in children, but what they didn't tell anyone is that the side effects are severe." Elijah's stomach turned. "You're saying Sarah was part of this trial?" Naomi nodded. "And she's not the only one. There have been other children, several in fact, all admitted with similar symptoms. Collapsing, heart issues, unexplained seizures. The company behind the drug has been trying to bury the side effects. But it's worse than that." "What do you mean, worse?" Naomi leaned in, her eyes filled with fear. "Cortexolin isn't just a cognitive enhancer, Elijah. It's altering the children's genetic makeup. They've been using these kids as test subjects for something far more dangerous." Elijah sat back, the weight of Naomi's words sinking in. A drug that could alter genetic makeup? It sounded like something out of a sci-fi nightmare. But here it was, in black and white, right in front of him. How is this even possible? How did they get approval for this kind of trial? "They didn't," Naomi whispered. "It's off the books. That's why it's so dangerous. The pharmaceutical company running the trial is tied to powerful people, people who can make things disappear. They've been targeting children from influential families, thinking they could cover it up if something went wrong." Elijah's mind raced. Sarah's parents, her father, the senator, and her mother on the board of a pharmaceutical company. It all started to make sense. They must have known. But why would they let their own daughter be part of this? "This is why Palmer was so insistent that I keep quiet," Elijah muttered, his fists clenching. They knew this could happen." Naomi nodded. "They're willing to sacrifice these kids to push their agenda forward. And if you go public with this, Elijah, they'll come for you. You've already been targeted, haven't you?" Elijah thought back to the mysterious note, the near car accident, the break-in at his home. "Yes, but I didn't realize how deep this went." Naomi reached across the table, her hand resting on Elijah's. "We can't do this alone. If we're going to stop them, we need evidence, concrete proof that this drug is causing these problems. We need to expose the whole operation." Elijah looked down at the folder in his hands. This was bigger than just one child. It was bigger than the hospital. It was about protecting innocent lives from a corrupt system that didn't care who it hurt. "I'll help you," Elijah said firmly. "But we need to be careful. If they've already gone to these lengths to cover it up, they won't hesitate to destroy us." Naomi nodded, her expression grim. "I know, but we can't let fear stop us." As they left the cafe, Elijah felt the weight of what they were about to undertake settle on his shoulders. The stakes had never been higher, and the enemies they were up against were more powerful than he had imagined. But Elijah knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away from this. The following days were tense. Elijah and Naomi worked in secret, gathering as much evidence as they could. They dug through medical records, contacted families of other children involved in the trial, and even found a whistleblower from inside the pharmaceutical company who agreed to meet them. But with every step forward, the pressure mounted. Strange cars appeared outside Elijah's home, following him wherever he went. His phone calls were interrupted by static, and twice he received anonymous calls warning him to stop digging. One evening, after another long day at the hospital, Elijah came home to find his front door slightly ajar. His heart raced as he cautiously stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet, but it was clear someone had been there. Papers were scattered across his desk and his laptop had been left on, its screen glowing in the darkness. Elijah's pulse quickened. He grabbed his phone and immediately called Naomi. "Someone's been in my house," he said, his voice tense. "Are you okay?" Naomi asked, her concern evident. "I'm fine, but they're watching us. We need to be more careful." Naomi paused before speaking again. "We're getting too close. They're trying to scare us off." Elijah's grip tightened on the phone. "It's going to take more than scare tactics to stop us." But even as he said the words, Elijah knew they were in over their heads. Whoever was behind this had the resources to follow them, hack their devices, and break into their homes without leaving a trace. If they weren't careful, they could lose everything. Elijah and Naomi sat in a dimly lit parking lot, waiting for the whistleblower to arrive. It was late, and the air was thick with tension. They had chosen the meeting location carefully, a public place, but secluded enough for a conversation without prying eyes. Yet, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "He should be here by now," Naomi muttered, glancing at the clock on her phone. Elijah nodded, his eyes scanning the parking lot for any sign of the man they were supposed to meet. His name was Richard Thompson, a former employee of the pharmaceutical company. He had contacted them anonymously, offering to share the truth about cortexilin and the company's illegal trials. But, so far, there was no sign of him. Just as Elijah was about to suggest they leave, a black SUV pulled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The vehicle parked a few rows away, and for a moment, no one got out. "Is that him?" Naomi whispered, her voice laced with uncertainty. "I don't know," Elijah replied, his gut churning. Something didn't feel right. The driver's door of the SUV opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the shadows. As he approached, Elijah's hand instinctively moved toward his phone, ready to call for help if needed. But then, the man stepped into the light, and Elijah's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't Richard Thompson. It was Richard Palmer, the head of the hospital's legal department. "What the hell are you doing here?" Elijah demanded, his voice filled with anger. Palmer raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Relax, Dr. Brooks. I'm not here to cause trouble. In fact, I'm here to help you." "Help us?" Naomi scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "After you threatened Elijah in the hospital? We're supposed to believe that?" Palmer sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I know how this looks, but things have changed. I didn't realize how deep this went until recently. The company is into something far more dangerous than I ever imagined, and if you keep digging, you're both going to end up dead." Elijah's jaw clenched. "Then why are you here?" "Because I want to help you take them down," Palmer said quietly. "I'm not the enemy, Dr. Brooks, but if we don't work together, they'll win." Elijah stared at Richard Palmer, his mind racing. The man who had threatened him now stood before him, claiming to be an ally. Elijah's instincts screamed at him to walk away, but the nagging feeling that Palmer might be telling the truth kept him from leaving. Naomi, however, wasn't convinced. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "You expect us to believe you? After all the threats, the cryptic warnings, and the fact that you've been trying to bury this whole thing from the start?" Palmer held her gaze steadily. "I get it. You don't trust me, and you have every right not to. But things have changed. I've learned more about what this company is doing, and it's worse than any of us thought. If they find out how close you two are to exposing them, they won't just ruin your careers, they'll make you disappear." Elijah felt a chill run down his spine. He had already suspected the company was dangerous, but Palmer's words confirmed just how deep the conspiracy went. Still, something didn't add up. "Why now?" Elijah asked. "Why are you suddenly so interested in helping us? What's changed?" Palmer shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the dark parking lot as if making sure no one else was listening. "They came after my family," he said quietly. "I was just another cog in the machine until I started asking questions. Then they threatened my wife and kids. I didn't realize how ruthless they were until it got personal." Elijah and Naomi exchanged a glance. Palmer's fear seemed genuine, but the stakes were too high for them to take any chances. Naomi finally spoke, her voice hard. "If we work with you, we need proof. Real proof that you're on our side." Palmer nodded, pulling a USB drive from his jacket pocket. "This has everything I've collected. Emails, contracts, internal memos. It'll connect the pharmaceutical company to the illegal drug trials and the higher-ups who approved them. But there's one more thing." "What?" Elijah asked, his heart pounding. Palmer hesitated, then said, "The trial Sarah was part of? It's not the only one. There's another project much bigger that's set to launch soon, and this time it won't just be a few children, it'll affect thousands." Elijah's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "They've developed a new version of cortexilin," Palmer explained. "This time it's being marketed as a breakthrough cognitive enhancer for children across the country. Parents won't even know their kids are part of an experiment, and the genetic alterations, they're permanent." Naomi gasped, her face paling. "They're planning to release it to the public?" Palmer nodded grimly. "It's already in the final stages of approval. Once it goes through, there'll be no stopping it. That's why you need to act fast. You expose them now, or they'll roll out this drug and ruin countless lives." Elijah felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about preventing a catastrophe. But could they trust Palmer? Naomi spoke up, her voice filled with resolve. "We don't have a choice. If what you're saying is true, we have to stop them." Elijah nodded, his mind made up. "All right, Palmer. We'll work with you, for now, but if you cross us—" "I won't," Palmer assured him. "I'm in this just as deep as you are now." The next few days were a blur of tension and secrecy. Elijah, Naomi, and Palmer worked around the clock, piecing together the evidence Palmer had provided. The documents on the USB drive were damning. Emails between high-ranking executives at the pharmaceutical company, outlining the illegal trials and covering up the deaths of several children. There were also memos detailing the launch of the new version of cortexilin, which was set to hit the market in a matter of weeks. But the most shocking discovery was the extent of the conspiracy. It wasn't just the pharmaceutical company involved. Government officials, hospital administrators, and even members of the media were implicated in the cover-up. This wasn't just a rogue operation. It was a well-oiled machine designed to protect the interests of the powerful at the expense of innocent lives. Elijah's hands shook as he scrolled through the emails. How could something like this happen in plain sight? How could so many people turn a blind eye to the suffering of children? Naomi sat beside him, her face pale but determined. "We have to go public," she said quietly. "This is the only way to stop them." Elijah nodded, but his mind was racing. Going public would be dangerous. The people they were up against wouldn't hesitate to destroy their lives to protect their secrets. And Palmer had already warned them that once they made their move, there would be no turning back. "Palmer said he's working on getting us a meeting with a journalist," Elijah said. "Someone who can help us break the story wide open, but we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Naomi glanced at him, her expression serious. "Are you prepared for that, Elijah? Once we do this, we'll be targets. You've already been followed and threatened. They won't stop until we're silenced." Elijah clenched his fists. He had come too far to back down now. "I'm ready. We have to do this. For Sarah, for the other kids, and for everyone who's going to be affected by this drug." With Palmer's help, Elijah and Naomi arranged a secret meeting with the renowned investigative journalist Claire Donovan. Claire had a reputation for exposing corruption and was known for her relentless pursuit of the truth. If anyone could help them bring down the pharmaceutical company, it was her. They met in the back room of a quiet cafe, far from the prying eyes of anyone who might be watching. Claire was sharp, her eyes scanning the documents they provided with a laser-like focus. "This is big," Claire muttered, flipping through the memos. "Bigger than anything I've ever seen. You're talking about systemic corruption, government cover-ups, and human experimentation on children. Once this hits the press, it's going to cause an uproar." "That's what we're counting on," Elijah said. "We need to stop them before they release the new version of cortexilin." Claire looked up, her expression serious. "I'll do everything I can to get this story out, but you need to be prepared. Once this goes public, they're going to come after you hard. They'll try to discredit you, ruin your reputation, maybe even worse." Elijah exchanged a glance with Naomi, both of them understanding the risks. "We know," Naomi said, "but we can't stay silent anymore." 2 days before the story was set to be released, Elijah received a call that sent a chill down his spine. "Palmer's gone," Naomi said, her voice trembling. "What do you mean, gone?" Elijah demanded. "He didn't show up to work today, and no one's seen him since last night. I've tried calling him, but his phone is off." Elijah's mind raced. Palmer had been their inside man, their key to unlocking the conspiracy. Without him, they were vulnerable. Had he been taken, or had he betrayed them? "We need to find him," Elijah said, pacing the room. "If he's been taken, that means they know we're close." Naomi's voice was tense. "Or he's gone underground. Maybe he's trying to protect himself." Elijah didn't like either possibility. He had trusted Palmer, reluctantly, but still. Now, with the story about to go public, Palmer's disappearance felt like a sign that the walls were closing in on them. Just as he hung up the phone, his doorbell rang. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. To his surprise, a familiar figure stood on his doorstep, Claire Donovan. "I've got bad news," she said the moment he opened the door. "The story's been blocked." "What?" Elijah's voice cracked with disbelief. "How?" "Someone higher up got wind of it. My editor received a cease and desist order this morning. They're threatening legal action if we publish. The company's lawyers are all over this." Elijah felt the ground shift beneath his feet. They were so close. How could it all fall apart now? "They can't stop us," Naomi said as she arrived, overhearing the conversation. "We've come too far. There has to be another way." Claire sighed, running a hand through her hair. "There is, but it's risky. We can release the story anonymously. Leak it to smaller outlets, get it circulating online before they have a chance to shut it down. Once it's out there, they won't be able to contain it." Elijah nodded, the fire of determination igniting in his chest. "Do it." Elijah and Naomi sat in his living room, their nerves raw after Claire's revelation. The anonymous warning they had received lingered in the air like a dark cloud. The message had been simple, chilling. If you leak this story, you won't make it out alive. It was clear now, there was no turning back. The pharmaceutical company was onto them, and they were running out of time. Naomi broke the silence, her voice a mix of anger and resolve. "They're trying to scare us, but we can't let them win." Elijah nodded, though the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. He had expected threats, even some retaliation, but now it felt like they were stepping into a war zone. "We have to be smart about this. We can't let fear cloud our judgment." Claire, who had stayed behind to strategize, spoke up. "I've seen this before. Big corporations using intimidation tactics to silence whistleblowers. But once the truth gets out, they lose their power. We have to hit them where it hurts and make sure the story spreads too fast for them to contain." Naomi stood and paced the room, her mind working through their next steps. "We'll leak it tonight. Start with small outlets, as you said, and I'll reach out to some activist groups. Once it's on social media, it'll go viral. There's no stopping it once it's out in the open." Elijah felt a wave of anxiety crash over him. What about Palmer? He's still missing. If they have him, he could be in real danger. Claire leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "We can't worry about him right now. If Palmer was taken, it's because they know he was helping us. But if we wait too long to act, we'll lose our chance to expose them. This isn't just about Palmer anymore." Elijah's mind flashed to Sarah, the unconscious girl who had unknowingly been at the center of this conspiracy. He couldn't let her, or the other children, suffer because of corporate greed. They had to go through with it, no matter the risk. "Let's do it," Elijah said finally, his voice steady. "We leak the story tonight." That evening, Elijah, Naomi, and Claire sat huddled around a laptop, preparing to release the story to the world. The documents Palmer had provided were meticulously organized, ready to be uploaded to dozens of smaller news outlets and activist sites. Elijah's heart raced as his finger hovered over the send button. This was the moment they had been working toward, the moment the world would learn the truth. "Are we ready?" Naomi asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Elijah glanced at Claire, who gave a determined nod. "Let's do it," Claire said. With a deep breath, Elijah pressed send. The files were uploaded, sent to countless inboxes, news desks, and social media platforms. There was no going back now. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the hum of the laptop. They had done it. The truth was out. But as the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew. Claire's phone buzzed first, then Naomi's. Within minutes, the notifications started pouring in. News outlets were picking up the story. Activists were already tweeting about the revelations, sharing the documents with their followers. It was spreading faster than they had hoped. Claire checked her email, her eyes widening. "It's going viral," she said, her voice filled with awe. "We're trending on Twitter, and a few independent news outlets just picked it up. People are demanding answers." Naomi let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We did it. They can't stop it now." But just as they began to feel a sense of victory, Elijah's phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You should have listened to the warning. Now it's too late." Elijah's blood ran cold. He showed the message to Naomi and Claire, their faces instantly turning serious. "They know," Naomi whispered. "They're going to come after us." Before they could react, there was a loud crash from outside the window. All three of them froze, their eyes darting to the darkened street outside. A car screeched to a stop in front of Elijah's house, its headlights cutting through the darkness. "Get down," Elijah hissed, pulling Naomi and Claire to the floor as the sound of shattering glass echoed through the room. A rock had been thrown through the window, landing in the middle of the living room with a note tied to it. Elijah crawled toward the rock, his hands trembling as he untied the note. The message was simple, but its meaning was terrifying. "You're next." There was no time to waste. Elijah, Naomi, and Claire scrambled to their feet, adrenaline pumping through their veins. "We need to get out of here," Claire said urgently, grabbing her bag. "If they know where you live, it's not safe." Elijah nodded, his mind racing. "We can't stay here, but where do we go?" Naomi pulled out her phone, typing frantically. "I have a friend who's an attorney, someone who works with whistleblowers. She has connections with safe houses. We need to lay low until we figure out our next move." The three of them quickly gathered their belongings, making sure not to leave any evidence behind. As they slipped out of the back door, Elijah's heart pounded in his chest. He glanced back at his home, his sanctuary, now shattered by the forces that wanted to silence them. He knew there was no turning back. This was a fight for their lives. They drove in silence, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. Every shadow on the road felt like a threat, every car behind them a potential enemy. Claire was on her phone, coordinating with news outlets to keep the story alive, while Naomi contacted her attorney friend for help. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a small, secluded house on the outskirts of the city. Naomi's friend had arranged for them to stay there while they figured out their next move. It wasn't much, but it was safe, for now. Inside, the tension was palpable. Elijah paced the room, his mind racing. They had succeeded in getting the truth out, but now the real battle began. "We need to stay vigilant," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "They'll try to discredit us, to make it look like we're the ones lying. We have to stay ahead of them." Elijah nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Palmer was still missing, and the pharmaceutical company wouldn't stop until they silenced everyone involved. He couldn't let that happen. "We need more than just the documents," Elijah said suddenly. "We need someone from the inside to testify. If we can get Palmer back, he can blow this thing wide open." Claire frowned. "But Palmer's gone. We don't even know if he's still alive." Elijah shook his head. "I have a feeling he's still out there. He knew too much. They wouldn't kill him unless they had no other choice. He's our best shot at taking them down." Naomi looked at him, her expression hard. "Then we find him." The message had come in the middle of the night, just as they were preparing to go to sleep. It was short and to the point. "Palmer is being held in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, but if you try to rescue him, you'll never make it out alive." Elijah stared at the message, his mind whirling. It could be a trap, a ploy to lure them into a dangerous situation, but it was their only lead. If Palmer was still alive, they had to act fast. "We can't trust it," Naomi said, pacing the room. "It's too risky." "But what if it's real?" Elijah countered. "Palmer is the key to all of this. If we can get him out, we can blow this thing wide open." Claire looked between them, her expression torn. "We don't have many options. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks." Elijah made up his mind. "I'm going. You two can stay here, but I can't just sit around while Palmer might be out there, risking everything." Naomi sighed, grabbing her jacket. "You're not going alone. We'll figure this out together." The drive to the warehouse was tense, the air thick with unspoken fear. As they approached the location, Elijah's heart pounded in his chest. The warehouse loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding, like something out of a nightmare. They parked the car a few blocks away, moving cautiously through the shadows. Elijah led the way, his senses heightened as they approached the entrance. "Stay close," he whispered to Naomi and Claire. "If things go south, we need to get out fast." The warehouse was eerily quiet as they slipped inside, their footsteps barely audible on the concrete floor. The dim light from their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing rows of abandoned machinery and crates. Then they heard it, a faint noise, like someone breathing heavily. Elijah froze, motioning for the others to stay quiet. Slowly, they crept toward the sound, their nerves on edge. As they rounded a corner, Elijah's heart leapt into his throat. There, tied to a chair in the center of the room, was Palmer. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, but he was alive. "Palmer!" Elijah rushed forward, quickly untying the ropes that bound him. Palmer's eyes fluttered open and he looked up at Elijah with a weak smile. "You came." "We're getting you out of here," Elijah said urgently. "Can you walk?" Palmer nodded, struggling to his feet with Elijah's help. But just as they turned to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. "Go! Go! Go!" Claire hissed, pushing them forward. They broke into a sprint, racing toward the exit as the footsteps grew louder behind them. Just as they reached the door, a group of men appeared, blocking their path. "We've got company," Naomi whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Elijah's mind raced. They were trapped. They were cornered, with no way out. The group of men who blocked their path looked ready to finish the job. Elijah's heart pounded in his chest as he looked around, searching for any way to escape. But before he could act, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing man who exuded authority. He stepped in front of the group of thugs, his eyes locked on Elijah. "Let them go," the man ordered, his voice calm but commanding. The thugs hesitated, glancing at each other in confusion. "I said, let them go," the man repeated, his tone hardening. One by one, the men backed away, their faces filled with uncertainty. Within seconds, they disappeared into the shadows, leaving Elijah, Naomi, Claire, and Palmer standing alone in the warehouse. Elijah turned to face the man, his heart still racing. "Who are you?" The man smiled slightly, his eyes glinting in the darkness. "Let's just say I'm someone who doesn't like what's going on here. You're not the only ones trying to stop them." Elijah frowned, still wary. "Why are you helping us?" The man's smile faded. "Because what they're doing is wrong. The pharmaceutical company, the politicians, they're all in on it. But they've crossed a line, and now it's time to bring them down. Naomi stepped forward, her voice trembling. Do you have proof? Can you help us? The man nodded, pulling a small flash drive from his pocket. This has everything you need. Financial records, internal emails, documents tying the company to illegal human experimentation. It's all there. Elijah took the drive, his hands shaking. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. With this evidence, they could bring the whole conspiracy crashing down. Thank you, Elijah said, his voice filled with gratitude. The man nodded once. You're welcome, but be careful. They won't go down without a fight. Elijah, Naomi, Claire, and Palmer regrouped at their safe house, adrenaline still pumping through their veins. The flash drive they had received from the mysterious man felt like a lifeline, the key to bringing the entire conspiracy crashing down. But as they reviewed the files, they uncovered something far more horrifying than they had imagined. The drug trial that Sarah had been part of? It wasn't just about enhancing cognitive abilities. It was part of a larger experiment. An experiment designed to manipulate the genetic makeup of children from specific racial backgrounds. The pharmaceutical company had been targeting black children, altering their genes under the guise of medical treatment. Elijah's blood ran cold as he read through the documents. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a case of corporate greed. It was an orchestrated plan to use vulnerable children as test subjects in a twisted eugenics experiment. They were trying to change them, Naomi whispered, her voice trembling, to make them different. Elijah stared at the screen, his hands shaking with rage. They were playing God. Claire sat back in her chair, her face pale. This is bigger than anything we could have imagined. Once this gets out, it's going to shake the world. Palmer, still recovering from his ordeal, spoke up. We have to release this, now. If we wait any longer, they'll find a way to bury it. Elijah nodded, his mind made up. They had the evidence, they had the truth. Now, it was time to take action. The next morning, Elijah, Naomi, and Claire released the final piece of the story. The flash drive, along with the damning documents, was sent to every major news outlet, activist group, and whistleblower organization they could think of. Within hours, the world knew the truth. The response was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted across the country, demanding justice for the children who had been used as test subjects. The pharmaceutical company's stock plummeted, and several high-ranking executives were arrested. The government launched an investigation, and the hospital where Elijah worked was put under intense scrutiny. But the fight wasn't over. As the legal battles began, Elijah and Naomi found themselves at the center of a media firestorm. They were hailed as heroes by some, but others tried to discredit them, claiming they were part of a smear campaign against the company. Despite the chaos, Elijah knew they had done the right thing. They had saved lives. They had exposed the truth. And yet, the cost had been high. Palmer, though physically recovered, was emotionally scarred by his time in captivity. Naomi and Claire had sacrificed their careers, knowing they would likely never work in their fields again. And Elijah's own life had been turned upside down, the safety and security he once knew now a distant memory. But as he stood in front of the hospital one last time, watching as the media swarmed the building, Elijah felt a sense of peace. The battle wasn't over, but they had won the first fight. The children who had been experimented on would get the justice they deserved. And as for Sarah, she had made a full recovery. Her parents, now fully aware of the truth, had vowed to support Elijah and Naomi in their fight to hold the pharmaceutical company accountable. Months passed, and the dust began to settle. Elijah had left the hospital, choosing to start a new chapter of his life away from the spotlight. Naomi had taken up a new position at a clinic for underprivileged children, where she could continue her work without the constraints of corporate oversight. But the fight for justice wasn't over. Elijah and Naomi had dedicated themselves to continuing their work, exposing corruption, advocating for patient rights, and ensuring that the horrors they had uncovered would never happen again. One evening, as Elijah sat in his new office, he received a call. It was Claire. "Hey," she said, her voice bright. "I thought you'd want to know. The pharmaceutical company just settled. The families of the children are getting millions in compensation, and the executives are facing criminal charges." Elijah smiled, relief washing over him. "That's good news." Claire paused before speaking again. "You did it, Elijah. You saved those kids." Elijah's smile widened. "We did it, Claire. We all did." As he hung up the phone, Elijah leaned back in his chair, staring out at the sunset. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time he felt hopeful. He had saved lives. He had exposed the truth. And no matter what came next, Elijah knew he would never stop fighting for what was right. The story of the pharmaceutical company's illegal drug trials became one of the biggest scandals in modern history. The public outrage led to sweeping reforms in the medical industry, with new laws put in place to protect patients from unethical experimentation. Elijah and Naomi continued their work as advocates, helping other whistleblowers come forward and fighting for justice wherever it was needed. Their efforts inspired a new generation of doctors, scientists, and activists to stand up against corruption and fight for the rights of the vulnerable. As for Sarah, she grew up healthy and happy, unaware of the role she had played in exposing one of the darkest secrets of the medical world. Her parents remained involved in the movement to reform the pharmaceutical industry, using their influence to ensure that no other child would suffer as Sarah had. The world had changed, but the fight for justice continued. And Elijah Brooks would be there every step of the way. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up for truth and justice, we invite you to take action. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose corruption and celebrate heroes like Dr. Elijah Brooks. Don't let the fight end here. Share this story with your friends and family, and let's raise awareness about the need for accountability in the medical industry.